So in this program, I wanted to show you several of the things that you can do with the class. You probably don't need to implement these in program 6, the pig dice game that you're working on currently, but it can give you some ideas about how to use a class and all the things that you can do with the class. And this is still just kind of scratching the surface, but this has gone a little bit further into some of the features of a class. So one of the things that we're going to do with this program is we've got pretty much all of the functions inside the class. So when we look at main, which is down here on the bottom, main is actually fairly small and consists really just of some control structure, a little bit of input-output, and then mostly using the class. So let me run the program and then let's see what it does, and then we'll go through it step by step. So this is an example of using C++. You probably wouldn't use it to create and manage a database, but you might use it to occasionally pull things off of a database, or run reports, or go through and error check databases, things like that. So let's say that this is what we're working on here. We've got our class set up to interact with this database. And then I'll show you later in the course how you could actually use this and create a big database and create a big file and set up a vector and so forth. But for right now, it's just looking at individual records. So it's creating a default student. So this John David Doe with the banner ID, birth date, and email. And then if we say yes, we want to create a student, then it allows us to create a student. Now, with this one, notice that I can enter 2 words separated by a space, and it'll go ahead and take them for all of these name fields. And then it's going to check later to see if these are duplicate records, and it's going to compare the banner ID. So let me enter the same banner ID. And then I'm going to enter a different birth month. So I'm going to do 11/12/1913. So then it's going to print out a summary of everything that I entered, so you can see that all the information that I entered is going in there correctly. I'll also show you how to do this. It concatenates all the string fields together up here to create a single name field as a string. And then it's checking to see if the 2 students are duplicates of each other, and it does find the duplication, that there is an error. So let's go through the program and see what all it's doing. Let's start up here in our class, and then we'll go down to main. So we've got a couple of usual sort of things in the class. So at the class, we've got our private and our public. We've got some variables that are under private, so banner ID, first name, middle name, last name, date of birth, an email. You could group these together. I'm just kind of separating them out to increase readability a little bit. And then this is something new. This is a function that sits under private. So this function will be internal to the class, and main won't be able to access this function. So this is a function that's going to add students. And so if we had this as a database, we probably don't want our overall large program or other functions working with our database. We want to just kind of keep it with the class that we're using to create and manage the database. So that might be why we'd want to store it here under private. And then in public, we have our 2 constructors, so a default constructor and a parameterized constructor. Notice that the parameterized constructor just has to get some kind of parameter. So we're just going to pass it a bool just so we can separate it from the default constructor. And then we've got the usual kind of get functions. Now notice that these are going to be slightly different though, because with the get full name, I wanted to show you how you can actually use a pass by reference. So notice the ampersand in here. So remember that the ampersand on the receiving side means that you're sending a location, you're not sending a copy of the object. And you can set this up in your prototype one of two ways. You can go ahead and label a variable, so we have ampersand and then the S variable here, or you can just label it with the field. So in this case, an int is the type for that field, and then the ampersand follows the int, but there's no additional variable name at this point. We'll give one later. Here's our get email. And then now we've got an operator that's overloaded. So we wanted to check for duplicate records, so we can define an operator. So we're going to define the operator, the equivalency operator, which is the double equals. We have to put what it should return. So since it's a double equals, it should return a true or a false, so that would be a boolean. We have to use this keyword operator so that it's expecting an operator. Include the operator, include how we're going to reference the right-hand side, and then the other part out here is the left-hand side. The CONSC just means that it's constant, so don't let this operator function change anything in either of the two instances of the class. And then we've got this function print student, which doesn't receive an argument and it doesn't return anything. It just prints out a summary. We're going to leave it in public, but we'll use it both internally within the class and we'll also use it in main. So let's just go through each of these functions. So here's our default constructor. So our default constructor setting up our demo student. Here's our parameterized constructor. So our parameterized constructor only does this and runs add student. So let's go and skip down to add student, but I wanted to show you this one thing. It's a good idea to scope it back to student so that you know it's not just a random function that exists somewhere in your program, but this student : add student, make for sure that it goes back to that class. But notice that you don't need a class instance name in front of it. So it's not my_student.add student. It's just add student because you're already in the class, you're already in that instance, and so you're just running a function that already exists within that class family. So let's skip down to add student and then we'll come back up to here. So here's add student. It's just this input output, so it's prompting the user. Now the difference here is it's possible for someone to have two strings or more strings separated by a space for any of their name fields. So you could have two first names, two middle names, two or more last names. And it would be nice if we could go ahead and capture that without forcing the user to add a dash or something like that that the student is not using in their name. So we're going to read this in a different way. We're going to use getLine. getLine exists within IOStream. And with getLine, you send it the stream that you're using, so in this case CN, and then a comma, and then the string. So first underscore name was defined as a string in the private data of the class. So this takes whatever's on that line and puts the whole thing, space and everything, all the way up to the return character into first name. It takes what's on the next line and puts it in all the way up to the return character into middle name, and then same thing for last name. Banner ID is read in the usual way. Month, day, and year read in the usual way, and then email is read in the usual way because it wouldn't have spaces into it. Okay. And then let's think about date of birth. Date of birth, an integer is actually wide enough to store the entire date of birth. So let's code up month, day, and year and store it in date of birth. So we're going to do year, 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 and then we're going to do day, day times this 10,000. So that'll move day, day in front of year, year. And then we'll do month, month times this 1 million, and that'll move month, month in front of day, day. So we'll have just a single integer field that's storing all of that data. Now let's go back and take a look at the rest of it. So add student's going to add that student using that internal process. A get banner ID is just fairly straightforward. It just returns the banner ID as an integer from private data. But here's where you can use a pass by reference, like we talked about earlier, and then string is already overloaded so that the plus operator works to concatenate, works to stick strings together. So we can do the first name string, add to it a space as a string, add to it a middle name, add to it as another space, and then add to it as a last name. So this changes S, and when it changes S with that ampersand in there, it changes the S that it got passed because it was a pass by reference. We can also do a function to decode our date of birth. So we're going to send it a reference to month, month, day, day, and year, year. It does a temporary variable. And then year, year is the remainder after we divide date of birth by the 10,000. So if you divide it by 10,000, you push the year off. The year would be the remainder of that integer arithmetic. Then that goes back into year. Temp is the integer arithmetic result of dividing by the 10,000s, where it truncates. And then use the remainder to get day, day. Divide by 100 to clear off those next two digits. And then month, month is going to be what's left over in temp. And it doesn't need to return anything because it was a pass by reference, so you changed the variables that got sent to it. There's email using the same trick with a pass by reference and just changing S to be the email. And then here's our operator overloading enabling code. So there's our statement for the operator overloading. And then we need to set up just a temporary variable. And then we do an if statement. So if we're calling right hand side RHS, so it'd be RHS dot banner ID. And then the left hand side doesn't need an identifier in front of it because it's just the banner ID. So we're checking to see if this is true. If it's true, we set equivalent to true. If it's false, we set equivalent to false, and then we return that value as a bool. And then when we want to print the student data out, we're going to run that little function to get date of birth. We set up our temporary variables here. And that's going to go back and unencode date of birth for being a single integer, break it up into these 3 integer fields of digits. Alright, so let's look down at main and see what all we have down here. So we've got a input output, so we've got a character for that input output. Here's the string for being able to interact with those pass by references. And then let's create 2 students. So we did student, default student, semicolons. This will run the default constructor. You run the default constructor by not having the parentheses there at all. And then we can print out the data for that default student. So running the default constructor didn't generate any output, but when we went and did default student.print student open close parentheses, that ran this function and it printed out this summary for our John David Doe. Then it asks us, do you want to enter another student? And gets choice. Just to think about starting on kind of protecting our fields a little bit, although we'd still need to do a lot more work on this program to protect all those other fields. In this case, we can do choice is equal to upper of choice, so we'll convert choice to an uppercase character. We'll clear any errors that are occurring in CN, so if the user typed in a string instead of just Y, and then we'll ignore any other data that the user typed in, so we'll clear out that string. So if your choice was a capital Y, so it would be a lowercase or a capital Y would get converted, and this would be true. Then you do student, my student, and to run the parameterized constructor, remember we had the boolean as the parameter, so we need to do my student and either pass it a bool value or pass it a true or false, or pass it a 1 or a 0. So I just passed it the keyword true here. So now it ran the parameterized constructor. The parameterized constructor then ran that member function to add the data. So we added the data. We printed out the data just to confirm. And then this is an example of using that pass by reference. My student got .getName s. Notice that there's not an s equals in front because we're not returning s. We're sending it the location of s, and it's changing s, and then we can print s out. So we did that, and then our next statement is printing s out. And you can see in our output we've got the student's, your student's full name, and it's concatenated all the first, middle, and last names together. Then here's an example of using that operator overloading. So we just named the two instances. So one instance was my underscore student, the other instance was default student, and we have that operator in between it. So it goes and it runs that, and it says, aha, we're returning a bool. So it returns that bool value, places it in here in the if statement. So it was only checking to see if banner ID fields were equal. In this case, they were equal. So it gave us the true, which was there was an error message. And then that's it. And then the program returns. So hopefully this one you can kind of see a little bit of a snapshot of a lot of the different things that you can do with the class. And you can also see a program where the majority of the code is actually embedded in the class. So if you're going to do object-oriented programming, as you get more comfortable with classes, you probably will tend to move more and more of your code into the class and manage it that way. It's a little bit more difficult sometimes to think that way initially, but once you start thinking in that way, it becomes a little more natural. It might take a little bit longer to set up your code that way initially, but the real benefit is that we can, now we've got the student class, and we can bring it into a bunch of different programs really easily. So it gives you that code reusability. Also, if we need to make a change to any part of this, it's very easy to make a change to a single part of it without affecting anything else. And then the last aspect of it is when you're working on a programming team, again, and you've got a bunch of people working on this, you can divide it up with all your different people, have them do their different pieces, and then put it back together, and you'll have a much better chance of getting a functioning program versus if everyone's trying to work on main all at the same time. It can really be challenging. So thanks for watching.